Yet 1 in 4 women in the UK are getting domestically abused and are getting sexually assaulted. 1 in 4. If you were in a carriage of women on the tube and there was 8 women, 2 of those women have been sexually abused. Even though that anger is absolutely valid and the hurt is valid, is we need more allies. And the allyship is not going to come from hatred and anger. It's going to come from explaining the situation to a point where it is really understandable. We just thought it's boys being cheeky. But the problem is, those tiny things, which I think if you look at it and it's 15, 16-year-old boys, a lot of the time we are just like, they're just being silly, cheeky boys. That grows and evolves into what can be very serious and dangerous behaviour. So if we are directly in a relationship with a woman, your friend, your client, your partner, if you have 4 women in your life, statistically speaking, 2 of them have been at risk or are at risk. So why don't we care enough? It's nuts.
So, Alice,
Yeah.
welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I may or may not have already explained at this point what we're going to be talking about today, but in case I haven't,
Yeah.
a quick one for the audience. One of the things that came up in the last time I tried to touch on this topic, and the feedback was that we didn't really clarify as to why I've invited the person I've invited to talk about the thing that we're going to talk about.
Okay.
To me, it seemed pretty obvious as to why I would be inviting the person that I was inviting, but to other people it wasn't. Interestingly enough, that feedback was only from men. So, we're here to talk about conduct. Conduct between men and women, and in particular the female experience of that equation.
Yeah.
And so Alice is a good friend of mine that I've known for some time now, actually, and we, like most people, see each other most on social media. And one of the things I was able to sort of engage with is your sort of updates and stories and efforts to raise awareness around a woman's experience in day-to-day life, dealing with unwanted attention. So again, for the audience, the reason I'm talking to Alice today is because she's demonstrated that she's an observer of these things.
Yeah.
And she's been able to, in my opinion, articulate all of that quite well. So I wanted to have her on today to continue articulating that and raising awareness around it, and also allowing me to kind of get an insight. And whilst I'm creating an opportunity and opening a channel for these conversations, I'm still a bloke.
Yeah.
And I'm not that different to any other bloke. And we're all actually, it is true, we are all kind of the same in terms of our sort of raw nature. How we choose to channel that raw nature will differ from person to person, and how we've maybe been raised and educated kind of gives us a certain sort of set of boundaries that we operate within. And that will vary from person to person. So a lot of us maybe don't pay attention to what's going on. And the last conversation I had around this was definitely like, there was quite a few moments where I was just like, whoa, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
Because as men, we aren't really looking at it from a female perspective.
Yeah, I think there was one thing that I said about running in the dark or something, and you messaged me being like, I didn't even think of that. Or maybe my headphones. There was something that happened that you interacted with, and you're not alone. There's a lot of my male friends that have said to me, wow, I didn't even consider having to take that precaution. So yeah, you're definitely not alone there.
Yeah, there's the word harassment, right? It's a tricky word,
Yeah.
and it's good in the sense that we've raised awareness around harassment. From a male perspective, it has been a little bit detrimental as well.
Yeah.
Because it's created a level of what I would consider over caution. So you might actually be like a relatively decent human being who doesn't necessarily have bad intentions. You're not looking to be aggressive or shout at anybody or like make anyone feel uncomfortable. And due to not wanting to be perceived inappropriately,
Yeah.
you'll then avoid engaging altogether.
Whatsoever. Yeah.
And so
I can understand that.
raising awareness around harassment seemingly doesn't seem to have stopped the people that would be the harassers.
Yeah.
If anything, it kind of made the people that wouldn't have been harassers withdraw even more.
Yeah.
Out of fear that, I don't want to be perceived as such because I don't see myself as such.
I completely understand what you're saying, and I think that there is I don't want to say a danger, but as a woman, I'm trying to be a lot more cautious about how I articulate my issues with this cause, and not necessarily my issues, but articulate how I feel about this cause, because what I actually don't want to do is to alienate my male allies. I want to empower them so that they can be brilliant allies. And the issue is because the problem is the whole subject arouses so much anger and so much hurt amongst the female populace in general. And obviously when people who are angry and hurt get together, we can get really riled up. And what we need, even though that anger is absolutely valid and the hurt is valid, is we need more allies. And the allyship is not going to come from hatred and anger. It's going to come from explaining the situation to a point where it is really understandable, because as you said, harassment is a really aggressive word. But the reality of it is some of the harassment starts off just like with racism, just like with homophobia, microaggressions that might not even be seen as harassment. And it's these little microaggressions that fester and grow into harassment that we need to start to tackle. But most men wouldn't even, I would assume, believe that a lot of these microaggressions are even harassment. So what I'm trying to say is, and this is hard because everyone who has experienced sexual harassment and domestic abuse absolutely has a right to feel how they feel. And I understand that, and we can articulate that and we can voice that. But if we want to be heard and helped, we have to be really mindful of how we articulate ourselves.
How you communicate anything completely alters how that message is received. And it's really cool the way you put that at the very beginning there, that when a group of hurt and angry individuals come together, it doesn't always articulate itself in the best way.
It's the wolf pack mentality.
And it's probably from as a male observer, that's probably what, whilst I have my own views and opinions that maybe like line up a little bit.
Yeah.
But that's not how I'm trying to address the topic. I'm not really like, I'm not particularly angry about it because it's obviously not
affected you
as much from a, well, I'm not going to get into that because I'm mindful of like, am I using the right word here? Marginalizing another demographic. Okay. So I'm going to do that. There are some ways where it can affect me, but we're not talking about that today. It's turning into this sort of like conflict as opposed to an open communication that increases awareness.
Yeah.
So harassment is a strong word.
Yeah.
How would you describe it?
I think that harassment is an umbrella of which underneath many behaviours live, and it can be really aggressive. But if you actually look at the entire umbrella and everything that's underneath, you'll see everything from a teenage boy slapping a girl's bottom walking up the stairs in their high school. Like, how many times that happened to me in high school and my girlfriends, I didn't think it was harassment. I thought it was just the boys in year 11 being cheeky. How many times on the school bus, all the boys at the top deck, you know, shouting for a girl to like show us her.
Right.
We just thought it's boys being cheeky. But the problem is those tiny things, which I think if you look at it and it's 15, 16-year-old boys, a lot of the time we are just like, they're just being silly, cheeky boys. But like I said, that grows and evolves into what can be very serious and dangerous behaviour. And so unfortunately, even though harassment is super aggressive and it sounds really nasty on the ears, you have to go back to the origin and to all of the microaggressions underneath it and understand that harassment is almost kind of like the end destination. So it is nasty. Like I said, just with anything else, you know, racism is a horrible word, or it feels horrible in the ears. But we mustn't shy away from it, because actually underneath it, there's so many microaggressions that might lead to really heinous acts. But we still need to acknowledge all of the microaggressions.
Yeah, I would agree with that sort of the way that you've kind of like summed it up there. It kind of has me thinking about a number of different individuals that like I've come across, or I know that maybe conduct themselves in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And these are not people that are considered particularly villainous by any means. They're generally quite liked. They're quite popular by both men and women.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's like these subtle moments where they reveal themselves. And the only reason that they reveal themselves is because they don't actually consider that statement that they made or the action that they took to be a microaggression or to be inappropriate.
Yeah.
For them, the conversation, if there even is one, is very much a case of, yeah, she likes it. Yeah, this is what I'm supposed to be. This is what I'm supposed to do.
Right.
To create that sort of connection with somebody. And so there's always going to be like this very small percentage of like genuinely malicious individuals.
Yeah.
But if we're looking at that sort of majority that are likely to, you know, shout something inappropriate in the middle of the street to a stranger because they find them attractive, or, you know, they're trying to show off with the lads, or you know, all of that kind of stuff, they haven't registered.
No.
That it's like, okay, well, this is potentially causing a problem.
Yeah.
And on top of that, they're actually encouraged to continue pursuing that behavior because that's seen as sort of very, I don't really like saying this statement because it's maybe misinterpreted a little bit, but it's very sort of alpha male. And if I'm that, then I get the sort of all the attention.
Kudos from my kin, and my group. Do you know what? It's a hard one because, like, obviously I'm in my mid-30s now. I had my experience post, you know, growing up 1990s all the way into the millennium. I would be fascinated to go into a high school and be a fly on the wall in that generation, because I know there's more education around it now. I know it's more of a faux pas. Even my cousin, who's 6 years younger than me, behaves in a way that men in my schools absolutely did not. So I'd be really interested to see if we have already started to unravel some of that behaviour. Because exactly what you said, definitely in boy groups, I've bear witness to that encouragement of that kind of behaviour. But then if I was to speak to my cousin, he'd be like, absolutely not. We do not. We don't rile each other up for that. That's instantly shot down. But also he was raised by a very strong, opinionated South African Portuguese woman who's will not stand for it, which we love. It's just, there's nurture, there's nature. And I think that nurture isn't just your parents, it's not just your school, it's the people you're hanging around with. And then on top of that, it's the society that encourages and enables that behaviour. So it's a very tangled web.
It is a very tangled web, and, you know, definitely a lot of the education starts at home with these things. One of the things that I came across, and again, I had my previous guest that I had on to talk about this. We didn't talk about it in the episode, but it is something that I've seen her post about, and you kind of mentioned it a little bit there, and you've used the word allies. And there are scenarios in public, for example, where maybe a group of men or a group of boys are harassing a woman verbally at that stage, and maybe they haven't done anything physical at that point, but they're letting their interest be known in a way that's making that person, the woman or the girl, feel uncomfortable. Now, the criticism was that none of the other men who were around in the scenario stepped in to say anything, do anything. The retort to that from men is, we're now putting ourselves in danger for what might just be, whilst there's definitely going to be a verbally and maybe emotionally and mentally scarring situation, no physical harm is coming to that person at this point in time. And by a man stepping in, it potentially then escalates that situation into a more physical space. And so I get both ends of the party. Of course, if you're a woman sitting there, you kind of do want somebody to like come in and help you out a little bit. You're outnumbered, you're sort of physically outmatched, and you're just trying to go about your day, mind your business. You didn't really plan on having to even be in this situation. And it would be natural for, there's anger there now, there's upset, there's frustration. You are perceiving the other men around you as cowards for not standing up and saying anything. Complicit. Okay, that's a good word. The men in that situation are assessing, and I've certainly been in that situation to some degree, where I've observed and I've watched, and I've not stepped in necessarily, because I'm paying attention to that threshold of, you've gone too far, now I'm coming. But there's a certain point where it's just like, okay, this person is just, I haven't been in every situation, but some of the situations I've been in, generally the person clearly does have some sort of mental health challenge. And so now the
provocateur.
The provocateur, and everybody else has got their head down on their phone. I maybe at this point haven't. I'm like literally directly watching the person. Not because I'm a particularly brave individual, but it's my unusual curiosity about human behavior that's making me pay attention to the situation. Which unfortunately for me always leads to the provocateur also then engaging with me afterwards.
You're like, wrong place, wrong time.
And because they've become aware that I'm paying attention, and now I'm part of this as well. But am I immediately stepping in to do something about that? No. If there is a possibility of physical threat, that's the only thing that I'm going to then be like, no, step back. That's not happening. And I imagine that would be true for most reasonable men or people in general. Where the verbal thing is like, okay, at some point in the day, even if you're a bloke, someone weird is going to come out of nowhere on public transport and start being weird and maybe you might be receiving harassment, someone's actually about to attack you. No, okay. And so for men, it's very much a physical thing.
I hear that. I'm going to challenge it. So first of all, as humans, we know that if we do something that is wrong, that's morally not right, shall we say, if we do it once and we find that we are not reprimanded for that behaviour, we are statistically almost guaranteed to perform that action again, because we've learned that there is no reprimandation for that behaviour, which is why people who often commit a heinous crime almost always recommit, because it's almost like they've broken that barrier and it's done. So with men not speaking up in public places when these things happen, it's almost enforcing this environment socially, that this is all right behavior. And even if it's shouting or heckling or whatever, and it's not got physical yet, the fact that nobody is stopping that person from doing it, that person is constantly being validated and thinking, okay, this behavior is fine, this behavior is fine. Nobody is reprimanding them for that behavior. And then the other thing I would say is it actually, I believe, comes down to our view of what is right and wrong in society. For example, if we were on a tube right now and it was pretty full and there was a woman with a baby, and quite clearly someone who is not involved in that group comes over and tries to pick up the baby, the vast majority of the carriage, I believe, would be disturbed. Somebody might say something. If somebody walked over the carriage and tried to stroke a woman's hair, I absolutely guarantee you nobody would do anything. So what I'm trying to say is that we value women, their space and their bodies less than infants, than the elderly and the less abled. I genuinely believe that's a fact. And that's not to say that's right or wrong, but I think every life is as equal as the other. And for some reason, we've become so accustomed to watching women be physically touched when they shouldn't be, spoken to by people they shouldn't be, spoken in a way that they shouldn't be spoken to. We've become so used to it that in our, I believe it's our frontal lobe, that we've decided that's okay. I'm not going to intervene yet because it's not become violent. Whereas if you saw a stranger walk up to a lesser abled person on the street and stroke their arm, it would be a lot more disconcerting. Do you see what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, 100%. And I agree with that. There is a lot of social conditioning, and in reality, whether it's conscious or subconscious, women are seen less than men.
Yeah.
When you gave the example of the child, every fiber of my being went into an attack, and that's just an example.
Yeah, you get angry, right?
I'm now feeling agitated by the thought of that, and I'm not going to have that same response. If it's, I'm still getting a little bit agitated if I'm hearing about some unnecessary and behavior that constitutes as harassment.
Yeah.
But not to the same level of instinct as it is with a child. And if it's, that being said, if I hear something happen to a bloke, there's almost no response. I'm just like, yeah, okay.
And that in itself is an entire conversation.
That is a
Sadly.
that is a different conversation. And I'm going to try not to make this too much about men's issue.
No, and I also want to acknowledge that is a very valid issue in itself, and I'm, really trying my best to advocate more for young men. But that is a separate issue.
It is definitely there are many issues in the world, and we're not going to tackle them. So, you personally, what goes through your mind when you leave home?
So it depends what time of day I'm leaving my house. And I would say most women, although I shouldn't speak for most women I know probably go through the same thought patterns. So if it's the morning and it's early, so we're talking the 5 to the 7 a.m., I'm generally not too bothered and I feel relatively safe. The tube is always filled with labourers and
All the
builders,
workmen, yeah.
always the workmen, always, in my experience, harmless, just going to work, doing their thing. But if I'm going out at night, it's a completely different kettle of fish. My friends who I'm going to visit have my location. My partner has my location. They know exactly where I'm going, when I'm going. I am always cautious if I'm wearing something that is revealing, that I have something to cover myself up on the tube, just to avoid unwanted stares, conversations, or heckling. Which of the last 3 times I've worn a short skirt or anything that shows any chest whatsoever, I've had verbal abuse both times, and it's in the last 3 months. So much so that I have a very simple, easy route in and out of central London. I'm really lucky to have great transport links. Almost always I have to come home now by a taxi, which is really expensive, obviously. I just don't feel safe on the tube by myself. Always thinking about having things with me like keys. Yeah, and making sure people know where I am all the time. And then running, I personally just don't recommend any women go running alone early hours in the morning or late at night when it's dark. Always wear one headphone only so that you can have your wits about you and understand where you are and who's around you. And unfortunately, it's got to the point where those are so normal. But if I was to say to most of my male friends, do you do that? They wouldn't even think of it. If they were going to Shoreditch on a night out and they lived in South London, they'd think nothing of getting the tube home. Whereas I absolutely would never anymore.
Yeah, I think it's actually interesting when you're by yourself as a bloke, and then when you're with a female friend or female partner or just any female in general, how your level of vigilance changes. And you're almost now by proximity kind of like sucked into the challenges that women deal with in public.
Yeah.
Because when you're by yourself, you're walking around and I don't know, I can't speak for every single person, maybe everyone's quite similar to me, but I'm kind of just like, if I get attacked, I get attacked, right? Cool. It wouldn't, as a guy, generally, you're likely to have had some experience of being in a physical altercation a number of times. It happens usually when you're quite young. You get used to it a little bit to some extent, and it's unlikely to happen so long as you're conducting yourself in you're not going around instigating stuff with people. Then you've got much less likelihood of anybody instigating stuff with you. But if it happens, it happens. You're kind of just like, whatever. But when you're with a woman, you're like, I really can't afford for this to happen right now.
No.
Because it's no longer about me being physically harmed.
Yeah.
I'm now concerned about this person being physically harmed. And your whole being starts to go, and probably is true I don't have children, but if I did, it's probably the same sort of sense of like, right, everything has to be a little bit more watched out for.
Yeah.
Because I can't take a risk with these people in my sort of company. And it's likely because women are less likely to attack men.
Yeah.
Men are kind of less likely to attack men. I've never looked up the full statistics of that. I got told something very early on, and I don't know how true it is, and I never really wanted to believe it, but I always just assumed that because I kept myself to myself and I was quiet, that nobody would bother me.
Yeah.
And I used to have friends at the time that were like, actually, the opposite is true. And because you're quiet and you keep yourself to yourself, you draw attention from like, you know, the worst kind of people, because now you're coming across as a threat. We don't know you. We don't know what you're about. We don't know what you're going to do. And so as time kind of went on, I did start to notice this, that actually, yeah, I did draw attention from like the people that everybody else was trying to avoid. Maybe a lot less so now in my like later adult years.
Yeah.
But I certainly did go through a period of that, and it kind of formed this impression for me that actually, because when I see women, I'm not really looking to attack them. I'm not even looking to chat them up, quite frankly. I'm in the camp of like, man, I don't need to deal with any headaches. I don't want anybody thinking I'm some sort of like weirdo that harasses people. So I'll kind of like, I'm crossing the road. Don't even really want to be walking behind you, because you're going to start feeling uncomfortable. I don't want that, all that drama. And I just assumed that then maybe other blokes would be feeling the same way. And I'm now thinking, yeah, you're more likely to get into a physical altercation. And again, I'm going back to the physical, because that's all we care about as blokes. That if you're a guy, then other guys might be a little bit more threatened by you, and therefore it escalates their level of aggression as they feel more threatened.
Yeah.
Whereas with women, they're less likely to escalate that level of aggression because they're not feeling threatened.
Yeah.
But you then get into this thing of like, why would then physical aggression be worse than verbal aggression? What level of damage constitutes as bad, and what level of damage constitutes as that's just part of life and acceptable?
Well, I don't want to speak for all women, but just as we've been discussing this, I've been thinking about the motive and how it's driven. And for me as a woman, like I said, I don't know how other women feel, but it's the sexual motivation behind it that is the scariest thing for me. I could handle it if a woman punched me in a club. If a woman punched me in a club and I flipping deserved it, I'd be like, do you know what, girl? Fair. Maybe I'd try and punch her back. No, I'm joking. But like, would I take it? Probably. And even, not that I would hope this ever happened to me, but if I was, I don't know, boxing and a guy, or sparring and a guy hit me, fine. That's not something that would like traumatize me, because obviously we're in a training environment. If a girl hit me because we were in an altercation, it's almost acceptable. But knowing that there is a sexual motivation behind the vast majority of these microaggressions, that's what's so scary. I think I could even handle it if I was in an argument with a man on the street, in the tube, in a restaurant, and he pushed me, or worst case scenario, I hope he wouldn't, but hit me. But it's when I know that it is sexually motivated, it makes me feel physically sick, because I am very aware of the statistics, and it's petrifying to know realistically, when it comes down to the nitty-gritty, how powerless I actually am in that situation. And I think that's what all women are aware of. You know, you only have to have like a play fight with your brother, your cousin, your best friend, your boyfriend, for it to get out of hand for like 5 seconds to realize, oh my gosh, men are so strong. And I'm strong. Like, I'm strong and I'm fit. I would not stand a chance. That's the thing that I think is petrifying. It's such an uneven playing field.
I think that's a fair statement. That being in the feeling that you have to live with versus a small moment of physical harm. And the feeling that you have to live with is far longer lasting, and it's something that you're going to carry with you more often than not. I'm generally not thinking about, even with men that are interested in men. My brain doesn't feel like, oh, okay, well, this person's being inappropriate towards me and they're making comments. I'm still not particularly afraid of that. That bloke, right? I'm just like, okay,
the threat is relatively low.
even if it wasn't, I'm willing to engage with that threat.
You're like, I back myself.
Cool, like
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm the same with a woman.
You can try,
Yeah.
but whatever happens, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Even if that person's got a physical advantage over me, for it to go sexual,
Yeah.
like unless it's like a prison movie where they gang up and they catch you in the showers or something like that. Fair enough, I can't do much about it. But
Yeah.
in a sort of like one-on-one situation, I'm going to hurt that person to a point where they're not going to be able to follow through on whatever thought that they were having. So, and that's even me having to think about it now in this particular context.
Yeah, you're going through strategy right now.
I would never have to. I would never even think about that. I'm just looking at them like, oh, just get lost, and carry on about my day. And they're probably, I can't speak for them, but I imagine they don't really look at blokes in that sort of nefarious way, just because there is that deterrent of, this person might fight back, right?
Yeah.
Whereas, there's probably a lot of guys that look at women with this sense of, you can try fighting back.
It's almost like, I hate to say this because this is really macabre, but when you're in a plane and you're going through all the safety features and they're doing the safety briefing, and you know statistically that actually if the worst case was to happen, that airbag's probably not going to do a great deal for you, hon. You are flying in a ball of lead and it is surrounded by petrol. You're probably going to go up in smoke. It's probably not going to be great. And it's a very similar feeling, truly, to being confronted by a man. There's a sense of absolute powerlessness that I cannot explain unless you're in the position. And I fully support women's self-defense groups. I fully support women who want to go to women's self-defense training. And I hope that it saves hundreds of thousands of women's lives. I really do. And their experiences, it prevents them from having to go through certain experiences. But there is the skeptic in my mind that knows no matter what I could do, if worst came to the worst, I genuinely think I would be relatively powerless. And not even just because of physical strength, it's how your body and your central nervous system responds in conflict, which I thought I would be quite scrappy. Turns out I freeze.
And I think that's the honest truth for most people. Interestingly, guys don't realize this either about physical confrontation because you grow up, you're watching movies and TV shows and cartoons, and you're constantly imagining all these sort of like action scenarios that you're in.
Yeah.
And it's up until that you're actually really in a scenario. And I hope most people don't have to even find this out. Unfortunately, I come from a less nicer part of London, and it meant that most people in those kind of areas are experiencing violence at a young age.
Yeah.
And the real thing versus what you see in the movie, you're right. Yeah, exactly that. Your nervous system is not prepared until it is prepared for that situation. And even when it is prepared for that situation, you're still experiencing things like fear.
Yeah.
Because you're potentially in a space where you can be physically harmed.
Yeah.
For men to know that they have that effect on women, I honestly can't tell you sitting here that even if they knew, would they care? And some certainly would, right? I do.
Yeah.
Even before having this conversation, I care if a man feels physically threatened by me, quite frankly. Like I'm very conscientious to not be threatening towards others.
Yeah.
I'm sure I can unpack the psychology of that somewhere in my childhood, but sometimes I have come across people where my estimation is that even if you were informed, or maybe you already are,
Not that bothered.
you're not that bothered.
No, in my experience, there's generally, there's three types of men maybe, and this is generalizing again. The man who is fully aware, is actively performing as an ally, who is doing everything they can to try and make women in their life and publicly feel safe. Then there's two other men. One of them feels attacked and is defensive and doesn't want to hear it, and is either completely switching off from the conversation or still involves themselves in microaggressions and behaviours that unfortunately misalign with what we're trying to do. And then there's the third option, which this is a generally good bloke. It's a nice guy and he's aware of the situation, but unless it happens directly to someone they truly love, they can't fully engage in the problem. It's hard and it's sad to watch because you kind of want to grab that person and shake them and just say, you know, I don't want you to care about this until it's too late and it's your daughter or your wife or your sister or your mother. But if you could just get on side earlier, we could prevent X amount of instances just by proxy, just by being in your peripheral and you helping other people in your peripheral. Just being an ally in itself, I genuinely believe, does huge amounts of work. So yeah, I'm kind of hoping that we can try and start to turn the third gen around.
Yeah, but I would be quite curious to see. I mean, I'm sure there is like research done around like how people respond to these types of messages. And from what I'm coming to understand about from the place of female health anyway, not so much how we look at women in society, but the two will correlate here in this situation. In this instance that I'm about to speak on, is that even in the research space, women are generally overlooked.
Yeah.
So I'm saying that
Yeah,
I'm assuming that there is research done on how these messages are received, but actually there might not be at this stage, and maybe that's something that needs to be done a little bit more of, to be like, okay, well, how do we effectively communicate these things to people? And whilst we're having this conversation here on this podcast, even this is like kind of winging it. We're discussing it, we're raising awareness, but I don't know that of all the men that will listen to this, how will they receive this information?
No. And we also, unfortunately, marketing needs to come into play with this challenge, with this agenda, so to speak. And I have no idea, as you said, what's the best way to market this agenda with the general male population. You know, how do we approach men in a way that's not hyper aggressive, doesn't make them feel defensive, that they want to listen? Obviously that's not my job, and it's an entire career, but it's something that I'm trying to get better at, particularly in the last few years, is speaking my truth, my experience, things that I care about, in a way that doesn't alienate people, because that's not going to get you anywhere.
Fair. I think that's the example that I have used in the past does that. It does alienate a particular demographic, because it's the only time men experience harassment is from other men who are inclined in such a way where they're interested in other men.
Right.
And so the only time blokes are kind of like this, like, I don't like it. I don't like what that person said to me. I don't like that person staring at me in the changing room. I don't like being looked at, blah, blah, blah. It's because they're getting attention from another man that they didn't want. It's unwanted attention. And It's the only time that you kind of experience what it's like to be a woman.
Yeah.
And it's not happening super frequently. And, the last person I spoke to about this kind of pointed out what we've kind of touched on already, is that it's the level of physical threat is different. And we've already kind of touched on that. So it isn't directly the same, but it's the only sort of like comparison that you have as a guy, and it reminds me of this advert that I saw circulating on social media, I don't know, maybe a few months ago, and it was a football advert, and it was like all these amazing skills and goals and shots, like sort of like highlight reel of these guys like, you know, like playing really good football.
Yeah.
And then halfway through it starts to show you that it, like, they've used VFX or whatever
Yeah.
to change the it was actually female footballers that were doing all the skills
I know
and all
this
the things,
campaign, yeah.
right? And it's like, oh, actually women's football is way more exciting than you know you thought it was. And so a lot of blokes, the way they did actually respond and engage with that, like,
Yeah.
oh wow, okay, cool, that was pretty sick actually.
Yeah.
And it was that sort of thing of, I can relate to it now because I'm watching a bloke do it, and it's, oh wait, hold on a minute, these are women.
Yeah. So this is my whole thought around also men advocating for us, because men, as far as I'm aware, and again, I don't have the stats on it, but men crave the most amount of validation from their peer group, so from other men. And I'm not sure if women are entirely the same, but I know that if men were the ones fighting the fight with us more, then other men would get involved, because they almost need to see their buddy being like, hey, I'm doing it, you know? So it's a hard one. That's why we need men to speak up for women more. But yeah, it's also why we need to, sadly, it's a bit awkward, but we almost kind of have to like manipulate the message to kind of adhere to the male audience to get them on side. But at the end of the day, we're different humans. We have different brains. We behave in different ways. Yep. If that's what we've got to do, that's what we've got to do. It is a bit exhausting being the victim and then having to fight the fight to try and get the oppressor, supposedly, to get on board. It's a bit of a vicious circle. But it's got to the point where I think most women are just like, look, if that's the circle, if that's the game we have to play, then fine. But just get on board. Join our team, please.
Honestly, I would say that's true of any social cause or any cause of any kind. My observation has been that ideas and concepts need to be sold.
Yeah.
For people to get on board. People don't get on board just because it's the right thing to do.
No.
And there is this sort of, I don't want to use the word heartbreaking, it may be for some people, but there's this sort of very this moment where you kind of realize what human beings are actually like and what we are like and what we respond to and how much our level of self-interest drives our decisions and what we do. And again, if it's seen as socially correct to be an ally, then we're more likely to do that.
Yeah.
Whereas it's actually slightly less to do with whether this thing is right or wrong. It's just like it places me in higher social standing.
Yeah.
If I go along with this message.
Yeah, it's peer group pressure. 100%.
And people sometimes get behind the wrong thing. We definitely get to see that a lot in a lot of different things through social media, and in general that has been historically the case as well. So yeah, everyone's campaigning for their cause, and whoever campaigns the best wins.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's a hard one. God, I don't have the answers for that. Unfortunately, I don't work in marketing.
Good.
But hopefully people who are better qualified can do the job.
Right. So before we wrap this up, is there any final points you think that we didn't quite touch on?
I wonder if there is still a mindset that sexual assault and domestic abuse isn't as common as you think. And so the threat isn't as big as one would think. So therefore, I don't need to get involved. I don't need to advocate. I don't need to be an ally yet, because they've got enough soldiers in their army. They don't need me. But there's 4 houses in the street and one of them's on fire. there's only 4 houses in that street. One of them's on fire. If you lived in the other 3, you would absolutely get your fire alarms checked. You'd make sure that your kids are turning off the oven because you've just seen a fire in the house up the road and you're like, oh, okay. Fire alarms checked, kids are turning off the oven, is everyone blowing out their candles? Yet 1 in 4 women in the UK are getting domestically abused and are getting sexually assaulted. 1 in 4. If you were in a carriage of women on the tube and there was 8 women, 2 of those women have been sexually abused or abused in the home. But we still don't seem to think that it's that big of a threat. And it's wild to me. It's absolutely insane. And even though we go through periods of time where it's a more popular discussion, and obviously, like you said, there's so many causes in the world that we need to advocate for, this is a very human, current, continuous problem. It's so systemic that if we don't tackle it with a lot more force and a lot more intentionally, it's just going to continue for generations and generations and generations. I think that there is an actual cohort of people that believe this is just how it is. It's been this way since my parents were together. It's been this way since my granddad and my grandmother were together, or however long. That's not true of any social construct. Just because it is so doesn't mean it should be. And it's absolutely insane. I always use the analogy of the 4 houses in the road. If you were number 2, you would be on it, checking that your curtains were fire safe. So if we are directly in a relationship with a woman, your friend, your client, your partner, if you have 4 women in your life, statistically speaking, 2 of them have been at risk or are at risk. So why don't we care enough? It's nuts.
Well,
we've got a team of 4 female colleagues, 12 female colleagues. That's 3 women in your team at work who are or have been at risk. And they might have stories and they might be living with continuous trauma that every day they have to unpack. So why don't we think it matters to us? Just because it's their story, not ours. Whereas we are a collective and we can work together. It's proven we can work together to resolve issues. So I don't understand it.
I think that's a fairly good note to end on there.
Okay. On a high.
I don't know who's going to hear any of this. And hopefully there's lots of other conversations happening right now in this sort of same vein. Probably we have evolved since, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, in the way we choose to conduct ourselves amongst each other. And hopefully 100 years from now, it will be better than it is today. Change obviously takes time.
Yeah.
With everything. And I guess, it will kind of come down to how much of this is nature and how much of this is nurture. And if nurture has anything to do with it, then for sure there is a way forward. Yeah.
I think the vast majority of it actually is nurture, but that's my personal opinion.
Right. I've got one last question that I like to do on the podcast, which is, it doesn't have to be unrelated, but it can be unrelated to what we've been talking about. And it's more of a moment of being sort of introspective into yourself. So I like to ask these questions, and I try and make them individual depending on who's sitting in front of me. And in your case, I think I'll go in this particular direction. So imagine you could revisit any moment in your life. What would that moment be? And would you do anything differently, if anything at all?
Holy moly. Oh my gosh. Wow, that's a big question. Oh, criminy. I think, how much detail do I need to give?
Only as much as you want to.
Okay. So there was a situation where I once was fired because I was naughty. And I deserved to be fired, by the way, absolutely. And I would take myself back to that point, or perhaps prior to that point, and understand that life is a game. And that I'm not Mr. Monopoly, unfortunately. I don't run the game, I play the game. And that we all need to learn to play the game. If you don't want to play the game, that's fine, but you need to exit that game and be okay with the consequences. So I think it's like a capitalist general outlook, but I think in my youth, I was very sure that my opinions mattered, and that the greater management in my life really cared about those opinions, not about meeting targets, objectives, and running their company. Obviously, I now know better. But I think I was raised to be a very opinionated, headstrong woman, which I think is great. But I was never raised to learn that's good, but life's a game. Get on board and play the game and win, or get off, get out the game, play your own game, that's fine. But don't be jealous that you're not getting the rewards or benefits from the game. You want to go off grid? Go off grid, fine. But you can't do both. You can't be a rebel in the system. You can be a rebel by yourself. So yeah, and then I'd also just say that I think absolutely everybody in their professional career loses their job at some stage. And to learn in your early 20s, it's a lesson.
Wow, that is a very good lesson. One that I'm probably still learning. Wow. Okay, Alice, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
This has been enlightening for me at the very least, and that's one of the things I like from these sort of conversations is it gives me perspectives that I wouldn't be able to come up with by myself. And I hope somebody out there listening feels the same.
Yeah.
I'm sure this won't be the last time I create an opportunity for this conversation to happen, and maybe we can have you back again to talk more on it.
Yeah, awesome.
I'll probably post your social media links. We didn't really talk about what you do for a living. But,
PT podcast.
I guess if anybody wants to reach out to Alice, should you not mind that happening, I'll put her Instagram and other social media links in the description below. But yeah, again, thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
And yeah, we'll catch you guys next time.